In this video, we're going to look at how to locate a midpoint of a segment. A midpoint is going to be a point that's exactly in the middle of a segment, and I'll come to that in just a moment. But I'd like to remind you the formula we used in a previous lesson on partitioning a segment. So suppose we had segment AB, and at A was the value x sub 1, and at B was the value x sub 2, and P is the point that partitions. Remember, that means that it divides that segment. It partitions AB into an M to N ratio. So this is the formula for when we use ratios to partition a segment. And remember that the second value was multiplied by the first point. The first value in the ratio was multiplied by the second point. So it was n from the ratio times the value of that first coordinate plus m from the ratio times the value of that second coordinate. And we divided it by the sum of the two numbers in the ratio, and that's how we came up with the value of P. And remember, P is a point that splits the segment up so that there would be M pieces between A and P and N pieces between P and B. Okay, so this was our formula from a previous lesson. Let's use that formula to find a midpoint. We're going to come up with a formula for finding the midpoint, okay? So we're going to find the midpoint formula. This is called a derivation. So if we have that same segment AB, and in this case, P doesn't split it into a ratio M to N, P is the midpoint. So a midpoint is a point that is going to be exactly in the middle of this segment. It's going to split it into two equal pieces. And we show that with little tick marks like that. And those tick marks mean that the distance between A and P is exactly the same as the distance between P and B. So what's that ratio? That ratio would be from A to P, there's one part, and from P to B, there's one part, and those are equal parts. So it's in a 1-to-1 ratio. If the value at point A is x sub 1, and the value at point B is x sub 2, we can use the same exact formula that we used over here. Only this time P is exactly, it's in the middle, okay? So these are equal parts. So, but the formula says that you take the second number in the ratio, the n, which in this case is 1, and you multiply it by the first endpoint of the segment. To that, we're going to add the first number in the ratio, but that's also 1, and multiply it by the second endpoint, and then we're going to divide that by the sum of the two numbers in the ratio. But if P is in the middle, this will always be a 1-to-1 ratio, so we will divide by the sum of those two numbers. Well, let's clean this up just a little bit. It's always going to be 1 times the first coordinate and 1 times the second coordinate when we're dealing with a midpoint. And we know we don't have to write the 1 in front of that. 1 times x sub 1 is just x sub 1. 1 times x sub 2 is simply x sub 2. And you'll always be adding 1 and 1, so you'll always just divide by 2. This is the midpoint formula in order to find a number on a number line halfway in between two other points, okay? So let's go ahead and look at an exact example. Why is that not